for inspiring us and for inspiring the whole month. This month's theme is grounding in goodness. We think that goodness is something that can very often be kind of abstract, right? It's the lovely things that are happening in the world, but we believe that goodness is something that we actually have to act upon to make possible. And so I wanted to bring you on, Sydney. For those who don't know, Sydney is a lawyer and also the creator and podcaster and just beautiful soul behind the podcast, the Seek the Joy podcast. And we are so excited to have you here today to talk about your sort of mission in life, how you came to start a podcast called Seek the Joy. As people with a network called the Conspiracy of Goodness, we vibe on the same wavelength. And to learn a bit about the wisdom that you learned from 3.5 years of talking to people who are spreading joy in the world. We were very fortunate to meet Sydney, and I recorded a podcast with her I think it was probably almost a year ago now. And it was just so
Something
wonderful
like
to
that.
meet you. Yeah. And so, Sydney, I will let you take it away, and this is going to be sort of a conversational happiness hour. But I want to thank you so much for joining us, and I will let you kind of continue introducing yourself because you are such a multifaceted person. I could barely introduce all of the things you are doing in the world.
Well, that was a really cool introduction. Thank you for having me, and so nice to meet new friends and new people. So as Liesl said, I'm a lawyer as well as the producer and host behind Seek the Joy podcast. And I have a second podcast. It's called Stories of Inspiring Joy. And I started Seek the Joy about 3.5 years ago after the way I describe it is I had to sort of hit my own version of rock bottom in order to figure out, one, that I needed to seek my joy, and then two, what even was my joy.
Mm.
So to tell this story the best way I know how, we have to go back to 2016. I was about a month or so away from graduating from law school. It was almost this time of the year, 2016, and I had shingles, and I was 25. And that should have been like the first time my body was like, hello, wake up. You're too stressed. You're not taking care of yourself in the right way. But I didn't really get the message. I graduate from law school. I sit and study for the California bar exam, which, if anybody is familiar with the bar exam in any state, it's pretty gruel and gruesome and brutal and all the things. And at the time, it was a 3-day exam. And I was in such deep fear of this exam that I was studying 16 hours a day, wasn't taking care of my body, I wasn't taking care of myself emotionally. I was so freaked out. So by the time I sat for the bar, I was in the worst shape I ever was in my life, physically, health wise, emotionally, all the things. That should have been another moment to be like, hello, you're too stressed. Like, what's happening? But it wasn't. And then September, I had appendicitis. I had to have my appendix removed. Still didn't get it. And then we go to November of that year, and I found out I didn't pass the bar. And that's when I really got it because I was in such a deep space of shame and embarrassment. I mean, when I tell you the things I was saying to myself, you wouldn't say to your best friend. And I had this moment, it wasn't in that moment, but it was about 2 or 3 weeks later when I realized, okay, something is going to have to change. I'm going to have to figure out how to take better care of myself. I'm going to have to learn how to lighten up a little bit. And I'm going to have to learn how to shift my mindset out of fear to I can do this. And that's what I did. I spent the next 7 or 8 months really figuring out how to take better care of myself. And so by the time I sat for the bar the second time in July of 2017, I was a totally different person. When I tell you, I was like, I'm going to conquer this exam and it's not going to conquer me, like that was the mentality. And I flew up to Sacramento to sit for the bar. And I get to my hotel room and I open up the blinds, and there's a big billboard outside the window and it says Esquire. And I thought, okay, like things are at a good place. I'm going to pass the bar. This is going to be okay. It was like a sign. Sit for the bar. 2 months later, I'm in my apartment, and I think I just went through this whole journey with myself, learning how to shift my mindset, take better care of myself. I want to start a podcast. I want to talk to other people who had similar stories and experiences. And I sat down and I started brainstorming the idea, and I was trying to figure out the name. Like I had the idea, it was like about positivity and mindset and just conversation. And then this bracelet that I own caught my eye at like the corner of my eye, and it said Seek the Joy. And I had made this bracelet in 2015 after a conversation with a friend. He's sort of a mentor as well. And he said, "You need to seek the joy. You need more joy in your life." I thought he was nuts because, like, who says that to somebody? You need to seek the joy. Like, it just felt so weird. Like, what does that even mean? I thought I had joy. I didn't. I didn't have joy. Spoiler alert. But I did make a bracelet because I wanted a permanent reminder of this idea of seeking my joy. And all of a sudden, it just clicked. I was going to start a podcast and have conversations with people about how they've overcome a moment of adversity or how they balanced realities of life with also seeking their joy. What does joy look like for you? It looks different for all of us. So 3.5 years later, here we are. I have a second podcast called Stories of Inspiring Joy, where people come on and share their story sort of uninterrupted every week. It's an awesome opportunity for reflection and connection and inspiration. We just celebrated the first year anniversary of the podcast. Over 107 stories were shared in the first year. So it's been a really fun journey. I always forget this part. I ended up passing the bar and becoming a lawyer. So I practiced law while also being a producer and podcaster. Um, that's that's like such a long-winded story, but that's really how we kind of got here with the podcast.
I love that story for so many reasons. And I think one of the ones that resonates with me most is that so many of us who are doing good in the world are driven beyond any measure of a doubt, right? We are so
Mm-hmm,
driven. And I think very often we forget to put ourselves into the equation of joy. I think, one of the things I always
mm-hmm,
scoffed at was you can't pour from an empty cup. And so I love that a part of your story is this moment of realizing that you had to go out and seek joy, just like goodness
mm-hmm,
is an active thing, joy is an active thing. And I wonder for you, how do you define joy? I mean, it's one of those
mm-hmm.
things that seems to be defined across many people, but if there is an expert on joy and all the different definitions of it, I'm sure it's you now.
I love that question. I want to respond to something you said though about filling up your own cup. I had a conversation last year with this woman. Her name is Akia Red, and she also spoke at my summit that I just had. And she said something in our recording that has really stuck with me. And she said, "My job is to fill my cup to the very brim. And whatever I have left over is what I give to others. I
Mm,
don't pull from my cup to give to others." And that really resonated with me because often we think about, okay, how can I pour into myself and then also pour into others at the same time, when the truth is you take care of you first, and then whatever you have left over you can give to others or projects or things that you're excited about. So joy, I think, is a really interesting word because we all have different definitions of it. Some people think of it as more religious, some people don't. For me, joy is not a religious sentiment, not based in faith at all. For me, joy is something that's very internal. It's something that you can tap into in any given moment to get to know yourself better, to explore what you're interested in. Because happiness, for me, is an external thing. It's, oh, I saw that cute puppy on the street. That really made me happy. I walked into the kitchen. My sister is baking cookies. It like was smelled so good. You get like giddy because you're so excited about these cookies. For me, joy is something that I pull from or I connect to within me when I need it. So it's like, for example, the way I connect to joy is this feeling of like feeling filled up and exuberant and all. Like, I think about it, I pull from a childhood memory basically of when I used to go watch professional tennis with my parents or my grandparents, and you're watching these two players, rally. The ball is going back and forth and you're on the edge of your seat, and then one of them hits a winner and the crowd goes wild. For me, that's the emotion I tap back into, that moment when I'm trying to figure out what is my joy? Is this thing I'm doing bringing me joy? So it's like a barometer I've sort of established for myself. So I think joy is something intrinsic, it's internal, it's something that you can tap into even in moments of adversity, even in moments when things are not going the way you planned or how you figured it would. Because the truth is you can hold both um, disappointment, anger, frustration, a more quote unquote difficult emotion at the same time as joy. It's just a matter of choosing how you want to hop into both of them.
I adore that idea of creating a benchmark by which you mark yourself, right? I think
Mhm.
very often, not as a gauge of, oh, I'm doing a good thing or a bad thing, but rather,
Yes.
how do I tap into that feeling over and over again? I think that's something that we often forget. We say, oh, I'm happy for now, right? Or I'm happy where I
Mm,
am now. But why don't we live in sort of the joy that we can achieve and that we can reach. I absolutely love that point. One of the things that I think I've had a question about all the time is like, are people intrinsically joyful? I think from your intro story that maybe you wouldn't consider yourself an intrinsically joyful person, but do you think of yourself as an intrinsically joyful person? I know I get the question a lot. Are you like an eternal optimist? And I always say no.
No, I'm really not. In fact, if my family was here right now listening to this, they would be like, no, absolutely not. And sometimes I think it's funny. I think it's funny sometimes that I talk so much about joy, because the truth is, I don't have it all the time. We're all human. We ebb and we flow. We have highs and lows. I think of myself as a seeker, as someone who's continuing to go out and look for the joy, look for moments where I can experience it, understand how other people connect to it. For me, that has been so healing to know that I don't actually have to be happy or joyful all the time. I don't have to be optimistic all the time. Sometimes we think if we are sharing positivity or sharing inspiration, that means you have to exist on that plane all the time, but you're human. Like things
Mm.
don't go your way, you get upset, you get disappointed, you spill water all over the carpet 20 minutes before you're supposed to be on a Zoom. Like things happen. So I don't think of myself as an intrinsically joyful person. I've had to learn how to tap into my joy and access it like a muscle, and use it as a practice, and use it as a muscle that I've had to build. And for me, that's why I'm so excited about our conversation about grounding into goodness, because the same thing is true for joy. You have to develop these practices. You have to develop ways you can ground yourself in the moment and pull from them when you're not there. That's the beauty. It's like when you build them up for yourself, when you don't have it, you can pull from it and begin to exercise it. So I don't think I'm a pessimist by any means, but I don't live in an optimistic state all the time. I constantly have to pull myself back into like, okay, shift the mindset. Okay, shift the self-talk. Okay, like let's pivot again. It's a continual practice for me for sure.
What are some of the practices that you find useful in being able to make that pivot? I know that for myself, I am not a naturally joyful person. I try and be, but I can get stuck. I can get really, really stuck in a headspace. Like, what are some of the practices that you've learned to cultivate? Because I love that, thinking of it as a muscle.
Yeah. For me, what has been really transformative are like positive affirmations. So on my desk, which is across the room, I have it's like 12 post-its on the desk with different affirmations. You've got this. I've got this. I am powerful. I can handle anything that comes my way. 2021 is the year that I step into the most authentic version of myself. It's all these different things. And for me, those affirmations have been so useful and helpful in allowing myself to shift out of a negative mindset or moments where I'm being too hard on myself into a more positive space. I think the key with affirmations is really thinking about what's going to resonate the most for you. So we see them all the time, especially on Instagram. Like people share affirmations. I certainly do. I share quotes, and I always tell myself and anybody really who will listen is I think it's about what is going to resonate for you. And part of like stepping into using affirmations and I can't remember who talked about this on the podcast last year, but there was somebody who I wish I could remember who it was, but they were talking about how you can't go straight to the affirmations. You can't like go straight to thinking about the positive stuff and incorporating it. You have to really start by looking at the way you feel. And sometimes the best way to do that is through talking with a friend or someone you trust, or journaling, or going on a walk and really looking at where you are right now. Why do I feel this way? How is this impacting me? Why do I think this way? Why do I feel this way? And when you begin to kind of unpack it and allow yourself to sit in those emotions, only then can you start to replace it and bring in those positive affirmations. I really wish I remember who said this to me on the podcast because it was really, really powerful. Because often we think we got to go straight to the positive affirmation, but the truth is there's some work underneath. What has also really helped me is going on walks. It's like the only time, honestly, that I let myself process is when I'm on a walk. Because otherwise, there's always so much to do. There's an email to respond to, a text, a call, something. Walks have really helped me. The other thing that has really, really helped me is conversation, which is why I think the podcast has been so important for me in my healing journey and the opportunity to connect with other people, because through conversation, you learn so much about yourself and you also learn about the person you're talking to. So when you're listening to somebody else share about something they're experiencing, or you're just chit chatting about anything, sometimes it sparks like an idea, or you begin to process something in a different way. It just hits you a little bit different. So conversation has been so helpful for me in shifting that mindset too. Um, some tools or modalities that have also been shared on the podcast in the last year that I think are really helpful. I had a conversation maybe 2 or 3 months ago with this astrologer. Her name is Sarah McCormick. She talked about how we can use astrology to shift our mindset and use
Hmm.
astrology to shift our self care. And like it's all about paying attention to the moon. So if that's something that's interesting to anybody, like I highly recommend checking out Sarah, checking out that episode, because I learned so much about how we can really, by paying attention to the moon, guide our self care and how we take care of ourselves. I'm trying to think. There's another one that was shared recently that I wanted to share with all of you. Um, I had a conversation with these two women earlier this year. Their names are Britt and Tara from Elevate the Globe, and they're all about ritual and how they use a morning practice to really help them step into feeling better about the day. So they could have had the worst night ever, the worst night's sleep, but they have a plan for when they wake up in the morning, and they adhere to it, I guess, the best way they can. I mean, it's pretty intensive, but I think my biggest takeaway from that is when you wake up in the morning, kind of have a plan, a guide for how you want to move through at least those first 10 minutes of your day. Because even if you wake up in the funkiest mood ever, which in the last year I've woken up in a lot of funky moods, to be honest, just knowing, okay, I'm going to get out of bed, I'm going to take a walk, or I'm going to sit in silence and stare at the wall, like whatever it's going to be, it'll just help to kind of ground you in that moment. So those are just a few that I can think of right now that have been super helpful, and hearing about from other people has been very cool too.
I'm wondering, to jump on the last point. Firstly, I want to highlight this idea of creating some kind of ritual. I was talking to a mental health professional, and they were talking about how one of the things that is really important is building these skills you have, because when your brain is in turmoil, when it's not feeling the most positive, when you are not in your joy, you have to build these skills that you can, whether it's the box breathing thing that really resonates you, or
Mm,
it's stimulating your vagus nerve, or maybe it's a grounding practice, or whatever it is, whatever you're choosing, you have to practice that in the off time to be able
yeah,
to utilize it when and make it come to mind first, because we're all trying to change our patterns and behaviors. And so I love that idea of creating some kind of ritual that sets you in your intention or your joy or whatever it is, to get you moving into a place of to reset. I think the ritual is can be a really good reset, even if it's just a
yeah,
reset for the morning. I'm
yeah.
wondering, in 3.5 years, if you've seen any kind of through lines with the people you talk to who are working in worlds of self-care and joy and knowledge and wisdom. Are there through lines, backstories, or experiences, or that run through them all? Are they all joyful as well, or is it just us that like to talk to other people that are the ones seeking and not naturally joyful?
I think the biggest through line that I've noticed through all of these conversations is that we all have a moment in our lives where something happens, and it's all relative, right? So for some people, it's a death in the family, or it's a health crisis, or um, financial crisis. I mean, it could be anything for anybody. We all have this moment of sort of reckoning with ourselves where we have to look at like who we are and what we're doing and how it makes us feel and how we're showing up in the world. And then you have that decision in that moment to decide how you want to move through it and move forward, which I think is really very cool and very powerful. Everybody that I've talked to has had one of those moments. Um, and everyone that I've talked to speaks so eloquently about this level of adversity. And it's actually reminding me right now of the conversation we had at my summit with Dr. Linda about, and Josette Cacique, who's an internationally renowned Zumba instructor, and AJ Sarcioni, who's a motivational speaker and coach, about how when you're in that moment of adversity, allowing yourself to be in it. Don't run away from it. The goodness, what you're supposed to learn, how you're supposed to grow, how you're supposed to connect with yourself and others stems from allowing yourself to sit in that space of adversity. Like if there's one thing I took away from that session, it's that is that when we allow ourselves to do that, we grow and connect to ourselves in ways we never would have anticipated. And then the joy comes after. Because when you go through something and you allow yourself to learn about you, and you allow yourself to learn about how you want to show up in the world and what you want to create or how you want to relate to somebody, I mean, the feeling you have of like contentness with yourself and joy and allowing yourself to seek it is very, very cool. So I think the biggest through line is that level of adversity and really allowing yourself to experience it. The second through line that I can think of right now, and I think it really relates so beautifully to our conversation, is everyone has had to figure out what will help them feel grounded, what will help them to connect to themselves in a profound way. Some people pick up a journaling practice, some people connect to astrology, some people um, ground themselves through music. I had a beautiful conversation with a composer, and he's also the creator of Mind Travel, which are these musical experiences. His name is Murray Hittery. I had a conversation with him about this time last year, and he spoke so beautifully about the power of music to allow him to get to know himself, to connect with himself on a deeper way, to allow himself to move through life in a way that really resonated for him. I had never thought about music in that way before, or even the power of food. You know, what we feed ourselves and our body allows us to nourish ourselves and then show up in a way that feels the best for us. So that's been a through line too, is everyone has had to figure out a practice or something that they connect to that allows them, I think, to continue to show up the way that feels the best and makes the most sense for them. And then to answer your question, no, like nobody that I've met is intrinsically joyful. You know, I think it just feels like, to me, it makes sense. Like we are all human. We're dealing with a lot as humans. The world is chaotic. We have emotions, we have families, friends, relationships, work dynamics that pull us out of that, I think, joyful state all the time. And so that's where those practices come in of really, I think, coaching yourself to allow yourself to step back into that joy when it feels really good for you.
I I so resonate with this idea of picking up a practice outside of what we do. And it doesn't have to be far away from it. It doesn't have to be deep. One of the things I have noticed as a through line is some of these people that are doing incredible things in the world are also like incredibly strangely, they've got the weirdest one most wonderful hobbies. Like we
Mm,
once met the guy that found the ninth planet in our solar system. It's way out there. And he was like a punk rocker, and there are other people who we've met who are, you would think that they're tech people, and it turns out that they're like voracious readers and 5K runners, and they don't look anything like 5K runners or voracious readers. So I think it is very interesting how interesting people are once you peel back the onion on, okay, you do good in the world, or you're doing good in the world, and or you're passionate about the work you're doing.
mm,
What do you do on the side? Oh, I canoe, or whatever it is, something strange. um one of the things I think is maybe difficult for a lot of us, and I think I'm lucky enough that like my whole day job is to do ever widening circles and conspiracy of goodness, but you balance being a lawyer, which I don't think is traditionally seen as the most world full of optimists and people talking about joy, with the Seek the Joy podcast and stories of joy. And how do you find, how does this resonate in your work life, and your outside of the Seek the Joy life?
I noticed in the chat Louisa asked that question too. So this is a great question. I feel very fortunate that the type of law I practice is entertainment. So I am behind the scenes making television shows. And for me, there's been a lot of resonance because where I work, the focus is really on being very intentional with the type of content that is produced. For
Mm,
me, that has been a huge mission and focus of everything that I do with Seek the Joy, our sister podcast, as well as the blog that we have on our site called Joy Corner. It's all been so focused on being intentional and being very mindful of the type of content that is shared. And so that doesn't mean censoring anything. It just means making sure that what I share and what I share through the platform all comes back to being intentional, inspirational, providing messages of hope and encouragement, and ultimately reminding all of us that we're never alone, really, in what we're experiencing. And so for me, it's been a very lovely, honestly, compliment to have this sort of legal work on the one hand, and then the podcast and everything that I'm producing on the other side. So in that way, I think it really complements each other. I I just couldn't see myself doing something with my legal career that wasn't in that lane. It just wouldn't feel good or authentic to me. I will say, going to what you said about kind of almost like the stereotype of lawyers, it's hard. Like, work is super demanding, and you're dealing with deadlines and uh, you know people want this and that and the other, and then this show's going to production. There's always deadlines and things that are kind of put into place, and you're like, I find myself often in a frenzy, like, oh my God, there's so much to do. That, like, last night I was still working, it was almost 8, and I was like, this is crazy. You have to stop. Um, you have to give yourself a little bit of balance. So for me, um, the legal stuff has been really a beautiful compliment. It's reminded me of the need of my own practices, of the need to continue to utilize them, tap into them, and remind myself, this is a passion of yours. You're here and you're doing all this for a reason. It's so funny because I was someone who at 12, no joke, said I wanted to be a lawyer. I had no reason why. I literally just told everybody who would listen I wanted to be a lawyer. And I realized in the last year, like, the reason why I wanted to be a lawyer was because I wanted to be an advocate. I wanted to be an advocate for myself and be an advocate for others. And when I was super young, 18 years ago, the only model I had of that was a lawyer. And now I really have learned that you can be an advocate through storytelling. You can be an advocate through doing what you're doing at Ever Widening Circles, and what I'm trying to do with Seek the Joy, of creating really intentional spaces for people to show up as they are, to share their story. That's a form of advocacy as well. So for me, it's been so cool to have that realization and continue to step into it. So that's kind of how I'm complementing, or the two complement each other, I should say.
I love that. I love the idea of young Sydney being like, I am going to be a lawyer. And I think
Literally
it's
anybody that would listen. I was like, this is what, and everyone thought I was nuts. Nobody understood it. So everything I did was like to go to law school. And then when I started the podcast, my family was like, this is so great. Like, oh my God, because I was always creative. When I was younger, I was making YouTube videos and skits with my cousins and working really hard to take those off of the internet because they're really embarrassing. But I just always loved the editing and like doing all these things. And, in the pursuit of being serious, so to speak, I let all those things kind of go to the wayside. So it's been fun to allow myself to tap back into all of that through the podcast.
I think that's something that's really, really beautiful and sits back to kind of what we had talked about before, which is like, there's this core part of you that you need to tap into every once in a while. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
we lose senses of, actually taps into then what you originally said about joy being something that you tap into from a feeling of childhood, which is, you know, there's a great speaker. I wish I could remember his name, but he says, think about what you were good at as a kid. Why did you love what you were good at? It wasn't that you wanted to be a lawyer; it's because you wanted to be an advocate. It wasn't that you were, um, you know, non-creative. You were being creative in other ways. Maybe it wasn't with your beautiful drawings,
Yeah.
but I think there's so many people who go into professions, who go into technical skills. You could even say to a certain degree, being a lawyer is a very technical skill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that you forget this creativity, this freedom, that those places that brought you joy. And so, that's something that I personally want to take some time to reflect on after this
Mm.
conversation is what were those things that what is a memory from being joyful that I have as a child, and B, I don't know if I did one, but two, or B, whichever one it is, reflect on what were those things that brought me a lot of joy as a young person. And what did I always say I wanted to do? It was
Yeah.
Egyptologist. I don't think I'm going to do a career switch, but I'm sure there's something in there that I can pull from that. You know,
Yeah.
as you're going through your day, and I'll pull from Linda's question here. I mean, how do you get back to center on a stressful workday? How do you
Mm-hmm.
does it go back to just flexing that muscle? How do you get back to center on those days?
Yeah, I love what you said, by the way, about remembering what you loved to do as a child. Because often when I think about joy and we talk about joy on the podcast, something that people talk about a lot is exactly what you're saying, tapping back into the things that you love to do as a kid. And I think, Liesel, you and I talked about this on our episode together on Seek the Joy podcast, because at the time I was making these beaded bracelets that I like used to make at camp. And it was like it was like the end of like the summer or something, or beginning of fall. And I was still beading these bracelets. And I remember you and I had talked about this a lot, about part of finding your joy, seeking it out, and then allowing yourself to tap back into it is about thinking about what you love to do as a kid. So were you super, outside all the time and, kicking the soccer ball or playing tag with your neighbors, or were you being crafty and making bracelets or painting or, whatever, or reading, whatever you love to do. I think that is so key in tapping back into your joy. And then also allowing yourself to find a way to recenter during a difficult day, whether it has to do with personal life or with work. What I do, and I sometimes need a friendly reminder from others to do this, is just to take a step back, like literally push the chair back, give yourself like space from the computer or space from the thing that is giving you major stress in the moment. And just what I do is I close my eyes and I just breathe. Like I just do it 5 times. Even that little bit of space that you can give yourself, it doesn't always feel intuitive, especially when you're in the thick of something and you're like intensely focused on it and you're on a deadline or you want to get something done. I'm the kind of person that I will sit in this chair until something is done because I'm so intent on just being done with it rather than giving myself the space to breathe, the space to have a little bit of room to get some perspective, to calm down. So I close my eyes and I breathe for like 5 seconds or I count to five. Something else that really helps me is like tensing up and then allowing myself to relax because we don't often realize how much tension we are holding in our bodies in that moment. You're so tense and then, you have no clue. So like making sure you're like tensing up and then letting go allows you to kind of de-stress a little bit in the moment. So giving yourself some space has been huge for helping me to kind of, like Dr. Linda says in the chat, like get back to that sense of center. Um, Calling a friend, like I have a coworker at work who, whenever things get a little crazy, we call each other, and it's kind of like a little vent sesh that helps a little bit. Highly recommend if you have a good relationship with somebody and you feel it, it's trusting mutually, and or either even someone who's not affiliated with what you're doing, give them a call. I think just having someone you can talk to and bounce an idea off of is really helpful. And if you're someone like me who really benefits from taking a walk, getting some fresh air, I highly recommend that too in terms of getting back to center. But if you don't have a lot of time, just physically pushing yourself away from the desk, taking a couple of deep breaths, allowing your, body to move or tensing up and then releasing. I think that's been super helpful for me.
Mm, mm. I I love that the practicality piece of this, right? Maybe I'm just a very
Yeah.
practical person, but it really is, I think, cluing in, part of grounding in goodness, part of grounding in joy, part of being, not being esoteric. Maybe people who are esoteric are, maybe they are floating on a cloud and capable of not holding tension in their shoulders, jaw, and kneecaps somehow. Really is about, I love that idea of tensing up and then loosening up, because it is just a reminder that we're
Yeah.
we're holding tension in weird ways, and we don't even know how that's then coming across the screen, right? We're no longer in a space to
Yeah.
physically be with one another. And before it could be like, hey, you seem tense, and now it's just like, no, I'm intensely leaning into the screen, you have no idea.
But I think what you said is so important because it's about small practical things that we can do. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be big. My dad really benefits at the end of the day from moving through a meditation and yoga practice. It's for him, it's an hour. For him, it's super beneficial. I could never. I could never. I don't have the patience. I don't have the time. Like in my mind, I feel like I don't have the time. I don't have the stamina for it. But for him, it's what's really helpful. But for me, it's a walk. For me, it's like taking a breath. For me, it's sometimes even just like, as terrible as it sounds, scrolling through TikTok for like 30 minutes because it's like mindless. Sometimes you just need to distract yourself. Yeah, Liesel's over there raising her hand too. So I think It doesn't have to be a big fancy thing. It can just be whatever you resonate with in the moment. And as you continue, I think, on your journey, your mindful journey or your joy journey, whatever it is, you pick up things from different people you talk to, you play around with it. I think trial and error is the best thing that we can do, is like practice. See if you like it. If you hate it, throw it away. Don't use it again. So it's all about, I think, just finding what's going to work for you. And like for me, just whatever is the most practical and easy in the moment is definitely like what I gravitate towards too.
I think that's such an important point, that it's an individual thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
I look at my partner doing exercise every day and I'm like, oh, geez, it's very exhausting to be on that elliptical for an hour and a half. But like, he needs that. That's a part of his existence.
Yeah.
I'm trying very desperately to get some kind of yoga practice in. I have zero practices or rituals. I was like, food is a hobby. I'll take that up now. But that's not really like making space in my day. But I think this is so important, is that we can be experimental. We can say, I'm just going to try this for 3 days. I have a very short attention span. So 3 days is all my willing to be trying sort of space. But just trying, I think we look at these people who are, I wake up 4 a.m. and then I go to the gym and then I'm a high achiever. And then it's just, or then it's like, oh, I do this meditation practice and I follow this, and it's just not right for, if it's not right for you, it's not right for you. And I think we have to kind of give
Yeah.
up on this idea of there's only one right way. There's only one
Mhm.
guru to follow when it comes to, you know, developing a practice that centers you
Yeah.
and grounds you and gives you space to be you and reflect on that.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm a big believer that you are your own guru. So you decide how you move through life. You decide what resonates. Like Louisa just put in the chat, that morning yoga, even if it's 10 minutes, has been really restorative and clarifying. Like that's amazing. But and that's what works for you. And so it's all about tapping into what works for you, figuring it out. Just listen, I admire anybody who wakes up at 4 a.m. If I get up at 6:30, that's a miracle. Usually it's 7. So I applaud people who can do that, but that's what works for them, and that's what feels like super energizing. And then there are some people who wake up at 10 a.m. and that's really what works for them. So, and Louisa is saying it's not 4 a.m. I figured it wasn't 4 a.m. But I think, it's just about what works the best for you and following your own sort of intuitive guidance, so to speak. And that's where being your own guru comes in, and your own teacher and your own mentor. We learn the most from ourselves if we give ourselves the opportunity to tap in and to listen and to learn.
What are your thoughts on, I'm sure that people that you've talked to over the course of their history have changed, right? I think
Mm.
getting into a routine, it doesn't have to stick forever. I mean, what are your thoughts on moving away from a routine that's no longer serving you? I think that that can be hard in and of itself for a lot of people.
I think it's amazing, and I'll tell you why. A couple of years ago, it was like 2018, I guess, and I had this really amazing, at the time for me, amazing routine. I would wake up in the morning and I would meditate and I would journal. I would read a little bit of a book, and I felt so great doing it. And then about 8 months later, I could barely get myself to open the journal. I could barely get myself to meditate, and reading felt like the biggest chore ever. And I started to feel really bad about myself. And I was very judgmental. And I thought, I was doing this, what I thought was this great thing for 8 months. Why can't I do it anymore? And then made this kind of decision. And I said, you know what? We're just going to let go. We're going to stop putting the pressure on myself to continue to do something that I loved doing before. I'm going to let it all go, see how I feel. I felt amazing, just letting it go, letting go of the pressure. And for me, I really realized in that moment two things. One, something that worked for you before doesn't mean it's going to work for you now. So allowing yourself the space and the time to be flexible and to just pay attention to how something makes you feel is really important. And the other thing I learned is that routine may not be the best thing for me all the time. So when we're in a routine, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to keep it up. So like, that's where these like apps, like for example, like any fitness app, if you have like a certain day streak, they reward you with a badge for like your 7 day streak so that you will keep going, because it's like once you start doing something and it becomes routine, it feels like really exciting and you want to keep going. But then the minute we sort of fall off the wagon, we're super hard on ourselves and really judgmental. So I have just learned that if a routine works for me for 3 months, great. And if I have to let it go, great, I'll find something else. So I think letting go of routine is really important if it resonates for you, if it feels good. I've had a lot of routines that I've let go of, and then a year or two later, I pick up a version of it again. It's just trusting that, you ebb and you flow, you evolve. What's exciting now may not feel so great later. So I think it's all about just not putting a lot of pressure on yourself and just trusting, what feels kind of exciting. So for me now, I journal when I feel inspired to. If it's like, oh, I want to write something down, or I want to, think this through, I'll pull out the journal from this bookshelf and, write something down. But if I don't feel like it, I'm just not going to do it. So
Mhm.
removing that sense of pressure or expectation, I think is really important with routine too.
Mm, I love that. And I think coming back to, well, I love everything you're saying. If you go back to this recording, you will hear that I say I love that to almost everything. Um, but, I love this idea of not judging yourself for like picking up something and just doing it. Very often I think we think we have to be very serious with what we're doing. You know, sometimes this idea for a poem will just come into my head and I'll need to go write it down. I think, oh, how very silly. I used to do that when I was a kid. Like, why are you continuing to do this? It's full, you've got this notebook full of like very random, very not good poems. And I think stepping away from the judgment, if we're looking for the things that help us seek our joy and ground us, you almost have to give up on that adult kind of, oh well, I don't do this professionally and in my day job every day, and so I can't
Hmm.
possibly write down words on a piece of paper. Heaven forbid someone should judge me for that. So I love that idea of not having to be perfect when the feeling arises to do it, having that in your arsenal to feel good about doing that. And I think that's just a really good reminder to highlight for people, which is in this process of seeking joy, it seems one of those things that you will have to do is experiment to tap in, and it doesn't seem like a process of perfection. It seems like a process of progress.
Hmm. I love what you just said about we often feel like we need to be serious in order to be taken seriously. And that's something I like a creed I almost lived by for so long. And partly probably why I became a lawyer was I felt like in order to be taken seriously, I needed to be serious. And so for a long time, like I didn't let people really know who I was, my personality. Like I'm actually more goofy than I think I let on. And, the moment that I kind of loosened up on this feeling of needing to be so serious, that's when really great things started to happen, like the podcast, new friendships, feeling better in my own skin, just letting go of the sense of we need to be so serious. I had a conversation and it actually just aired this week with this woman. Her name is Melissa Bernstein. She's the co founder of the toy company Melissa and Doug. She just wrote a book called Lifelines, and she really chronicles her journey with what she calls existential anxiety and depression. And her whole life, she wrote beautiful poetry, but she judged it. She felt it was too dark, too serious. Nobody was going to like it, resonate with it. So she kept it hidden. And then she published all of her poetry in the book that she just came out with. And it reminds me so much of what you shared about judging ourselves for hobbies or things that we enjoy doing as a way of expression, but because it's not our full-time job, like should I be doing this? Like is anyone going to take it seriously? And like my biggest takeaway from talking to Melissa has been if something brings you joy, if it's a release, if it's a way to express yourself, if it's what she calls a lifeline, something that keeps you grounded and tethered as an anchor, do it, express it, write it, share it if you feel called. We're multifaceted human beings, like we're supposed to. You're not supposed to be in like one lane, just doing one thing your whole life. So I think I love what you said. It makes so much sense to me of, we feel like we have to be serious to be taken seriously, but just do what you love, do what's exciting to you. I mean, paint randomly if you feel called to one day, color, bead bracelets, write poetry. It's just a way for you to get to know yourself better and have some fun. And I think loosen up and release that kind of grip that I think we all have.
Linda just said, sometimes I think it's some of our hardest decisions that are the most fundamental level of choice between fear and love. Do you think that seeking the joy helps make that decision?
Mm. I think I do. I think seeking our joy helps us in making that decision between fear and love. I really do. Because when we're in that space of joy, which I often think is really our truest self. So, like when I sit down to connect with other people in this way or for the podcast, I feel the most like me. Like I feel the most energized. I have the most energy, the most excited. And then the minute I walk away and I do something else, it's almost like the light dims a little bit. And so for me, it's like the more I connect to my joy, which is conversation, which is connection, which is having an opportunity to really explore people's stories and even explore my own story, I gravitate towards taking more risks. I gravitate towards stepping outside of my comfort zone. I gravitate towards um, overcoming fear, to be honest. When I am not in that space, I can be paralyzed by my anxiety. I can be paralyzed by fear. I don't want to take a risk. My comfort zone gets smaller and smaller. So I think you're totally right. I think as we continue to seek out our joy and allow ourselves to tap into it, once you know what it is for you, because that's a journey, even in of itself, is figuring out what it is that brings you joy. The more you tap into it, I really do think you move towards love. You move towards moving outside of your comfort zone, allowing that comfort zone to get even bigger, and you move a little bit more away from fear.
Mm, I love that. I love that. That is such a wonderful sentiment to kind of, I think, wrap up on, even is to,
Mhm.
you know, I really appreciate this conversation. It seems like every conversation I have on the happiness hours are like incredibly well timed, personally,
Mm.
professionally. I hope others feel the same. And I want to thank you for joining us, for doing the work that you do. I think we need more people making media that is truly joyful, that is allowing people to tell their unique stories, and is letting people be, uniquely and truly, maybe this word gets overused, but authentic, right? It's that I feel like comfortable
Mhm.
enough to come onto your podcast and crack four bad jokes, you know, that no one's going to laugh at. It's a podcast, but feel really welcomed in your presence. And I think that that is something you've truly found your niche when it comes to making people feel welcomed in your presence and full, full after a conversation. So I want to thank you, Sydney, for joining us and being a part
Wow.
of this conversation today.
Wow, thank you. That is so, so nice. I feel like every time you and I connect, or the Seek the Joy universe connects with ever widening circles, it's really always so fulfilling and warm. And I just feel like there's such a, I don't know what the right word is, but I just think we're very much in sync, for lack of a better description. So I really appreciate your kind words. That means a lot. I really love what I get to do with the podcast. I love the conversations that I get to have. I learned, so much about myself. I've learned so much about others, and it's been a deeply healing experience for me
Mm.
and also for everyone I get to talk to. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come and connect and speak to your community. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank